Once the tone has been picked up, everything else stops to exist. It becomes the Charlie Brown experience,
Right.
and it's all wah 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 wah, and nothing else is heard, and that's it. Now you're mad, and so I'm mad, and that's the end of it.
Hello and welcome to the Sittin In A Tree podcast, where we're helping you build a fun and fulfilling marriage, sharing our stories, and giving out advice to move your marriage forward. Now, here's today's show. Hey everybody, I'm John.
And I'm Shallon.
And this is Sittin In A Tree podcast where we try to help you have a fun and fulfilling marriage. Be sure you like or subscribe or follow, download, all of those things. Today, we're actually talking about something that was given to us in a comment. A listener requested this subject matter, and it's really on communication, which we've talked a lot about, but they were wanting more specific things that they could talk about. So today we thought we would give you guys some real world scenarios and some real world tips to be able to communicate more effectively with your partner. The biggest thing about communicating with your partner is you may not or probably do not speak the same language all of the time. We are very different, females, males, very different in the way that they communicate and the way that they speak, their intonations, their facial expressions, all of that stuff is very different when and how they use all of those things. And so one of the most important things is to recognize that, to realize that even though you are both human beings and you may come from the same country and maybe even the same town, that you really do speak different languages. And part of effective communication in a marriage is learning how to speak effectively in the language that your partner needs to hear in.
Right. And part of that is also where you come from and how you grew up and what the expectations of those nuances in the communication really are going to look like. And so even knowing that the way you project and your tone may feel differently to one person than it does to the other. And so It's going to be super important to understand how that affects your partner and how they're going to respond to that from the very beginning. Having good communication starts with sitting down and talking about communication and your expectations of that and how you perceive it, and really having those moments of saying, let's have some real good understanding of where I'm coming from and where you're coming from about that, and then building from there. But also really, there's other parts of communication that we don't think about. It's the subtle things like body language and tone. What are our eyes doing? Are we looking at each other? Are we looking away? And there's a lot of expectation with that within culture and that, but also, is there something else involved in that? Is there some neurodivergence where we can't look at you in the eye, and are we then thinking, is that rude? And those kind of things that are playing out as well, that we're not talking to each other about, but then we are thinking about when the other person is talking to us.
Yeah, I think that's a big deal. Recognizing beforehand and trying to have these conversations. But honestly, most people that aren't in mental health field or dealing with communication all the time, we just assume that you understand what I'm saying and I understand what you're saying. And a lot of times it's not like that. And so while you do need to have the advanced conversations about how you are best communicated with, you may not even really know, like that's not something that we're taught necessarily in school. And unless you take specific communication classes or something to that nature, you may not even realize that your partner isn't hearing exactly what you are saying until you are in the moment. And I think being able to have those conversations in the moment are also important, right? So when we aren't agreeing on something or it doesn't seem like our communication is landing, taking a pause or a timeout and saying, okay, I know that this just got heated. We were both misunderstanding what the other one was saying. So taking a moment in that time to back up and say, okay, how do I need to discuss this with you in an effective way? Because I know what I'm doing isn't working, and that's not your fault. That's partly me. I'm not saying it in such a way that you can understand it to the degree that I need you to understand it. And so being able to have those talks in the midst of maybe even a disagreement or a misunderstanding is really key to being able to have great communication, to be able to stop at any moment and say, okay, this isn't working. how do we need to change this so that it works, and not get caught up in anger or being mad or whatever, not get caught up in that or the frustration, and just dive into a new conversation so that then you can go back to the other one and do that effectively.
I think we really have to take the time to also know what we're feeling a lot of times within that, because sometimes we may feel like we're not being heard. And is that really happening, or is that something that we think is happening?
Mm.
What are we getting from our partner? Are we feeling not heard because of something they're actually putting out there, or is that just something that we assume is happening?
Right.
And we need to really have a moment of time where we touch base with them and say, okay, like, what do you think I'm saying? And we may find out that they can really, hit it out of the park and know exactly what I'm saying. And so why do I feel the need to continue to say this? What's happening in me that makes me feel like I need to say this again? Or they may not. And so that is why I continue to feel like I need to say this. And so where, like you said, what isn't landing
Right.
in this moment that we
Yeah,
have
the
to circle back?
assumptions are what gets us in
Mhm.
trouble a lot of times,
Mhm.
because we assume by a facial expression or by body language, or
Mhm.
maybe not looking directly at you, something of that nature. We assume that, yeah, or the crossed arms, leaning back, all of those body postures that we do learn about, we just assume that it means exactly that, when sometimes it doesn't mean exactly that, depending on, there's just so many factors that change how we communicate with each other. And a good way to realize that is just talk to somebody from a different generation than you. Talking with my parents versus talking with my daughter is different, right? That's a different conversation. They speak differently. Everything means something different. And the further you get generationally, the more the difference is. And so when you start thinking about that, you can have the same kind of differences just between a husband and a wife. And so you really have to kind of dig into that and be willing to ask awkward questions and ask the tough questions and have those conversations if you want your communication to get better. If you don't, if you just want to stay the way that it is, then don't ask those questions and just keep going on. But if you want to put in the work to communicate in such a way that every conversation doesn't end up in an argument, or every conversation doesn't end up in misunderstanding or a fight or whatever, then working on those specific communication things are going to be important.
Right. And I think it's going to be really important to understand the communication style that your partner has.
Right.
And so there's going to be some give and take in that, and
Mhm.
really understand, okay, they tend to be more, and I'm just going to say fluffy and give more information, which I'm going to make an assumption and make a generalization in my statement, but most women are less directive in what they say. They tend to add more of the would you mind when you get time, those kind of things, and know that that's where that your partner is coming from. And so I said women, but just let's say your partner, your spouse, where the other one may be more direct. And how does that land for you? And then what does that mean? And really, have those understandings, and then what do they need to either compromise on or change at times, and then other times to be able to say, okay, that's my partner and I'm fine with that. But then also, how do I change when I come to you with things at times to address things? And so it's really understanding what we need at certain times. There are times with you that I need to just be direct and say what it is, and then
Mhm.
there are other times you're fine if I come to you with a little bit more of my fluff and say,
Right.
here, I need to give you extra information, and you're like, well, I really don't need it, but that's fine. I know you want to give that to me. And so I think it's finding those times of that ebb and flow, and that compromise. But then there's other times where the compromise is that I have to say to you directly, this is what we need, because you need to hear it that way.
Mhm.
You don't need all the emotional attachment and the extra. You need the direct. And then there's other times that you come to me knowing I need the extra. I need to know what you did, this morning and
Mhm.
all day, and all the extra instead of
Right.
the direct. And it's finding those times to connect and communicate differently at different times.
Right. Real world example. When you maybe come to me with something and you are already frustrated because something has happened or you've had to deal with something, and you come to me and your tone doesn't change from your frustrated tone to a tone that is really more geared towards me, I have to be very careful to not get caught in the frustration. Now, we've had those discussions, we've talked about that, so you try not to do that as much sometimes, but I also have to understand that sometimes that's not, I don't wanna say that it's not possible, I guess it's always possible, but you're not gonna get that right every time, and so I have to be sure that I'm listening, not with a bunch of assumptions or not just reading into it things that may not be there. And we've gotten to the point where if you start talking to me in a frustrated tone, I will ask, "Hey, are you frustrated with me or the situation, or are you frustrated with something totally different? And that's just how you sound right now." Because I can listen to you sound that way as long as I know it's not about me. I'm okay with that, And so we got to a point where we are comfortable asking each other those questions, which saves a ton of miscommunication or misunderstanding, even. I mean, we've in the past had so many arguments over something that you were never frustrated with to begin with, but I got you there because you were already frustrated about something else. You had a tone as I interpreted it. And so I automatically came into the conversation matching that tone. Well, that's not going to work out well. If you're in a time of frustration, I need to be in a time of calm,
Mhm.
right? I need to be calming the temperature there, bringing that temperature down some. And so it's in those moments that you have to be really aware of how is your partner feeling? What are they saying versus how they are saying it? Sometimes you are saying things exactly how you are saying it. Like
Right.
you mean it to sound that way. Other times, not so much. And you have to be able to discern that and figure that out. And if you can't in the moment, instead of responding and just matching that level that may not be geared towards you, instead of matching it, what you need to do is ask about it. Hey, this is the tone I hear you having, because you may not know you have it, you know. This is the tone I hear you having. That's okay. You're allowed to have that, but is it directed towards me or is it something else? And then I can either match it or I can realize you're still dealing with other stuff, but we have to have this conversation right now.
Right.
And take it with a grain of salt and go on.
I think that's part of communication. I think it's really important when you're having communication with your partner, your spouse. It's really about having um, listening with curiosity.
Mhm.
I think that's one of the first skills. Kind of
That's
listen
really
with
good.
curiosity. I'm not listening to judge. I'm not listening to defend. I'm just listening out of curiosity. I want to know where you're coming from. So I'm curious about what's going on, and I'm just listening curiously about what's happening.
Right.
And so then with that, I'm going to listen and I want to ask questions.
Mhm.
So I've listened curiously and now I'm going to ask questions. And that way I get clarity.
That's probably one of the most important things I've heard us say is that you have to listen with curiosity. I mean, it's not just listening to garner information,
Mhm.
but it's listening to read deeper into it, not in a bad way, not
Mhm.
where you're assuming things,
Mhm.
but to truly see what is being communicated, to hear what is really being said, not to just take it at necessarily tone or
Mhm.
something else, but to ask with that or to listen with that curiosity is
Mhm.
very important. Yeah,
Mhm.
that's really
And so I think after you've listened with curiosity, and then you may find that you have questions, you've asked those questions, then I think you start building, like we've kind of talked about. I mean, we're almost 31 years in. So
good.
we kind of get that rapport. So we know, but not so much that we then assume
Right.
still, because there's still times that you'll be like, hey, wait, are you frustrated with me? Or I'll say, okay, you sound mad. Are you mad? And so we ask those questions, but we
Mhm.
don't still continue to just assume that we're the expert on what's going on with the other person.
Right.
And so we don't assume and we don't think we're experts. And so we then have to continue to take in information all the time while things are going on, and we keep building that communication by asking those questions, by still not assuming, by saying, okay, what else is going on? How can I help? And really learning still as we're growing and going. I mean, you just have to grow in communication all the time. I mean, we are still changing all the time. Life is still happening all the time, and you still are picking up new things and new ways to communicate, but you're also learning about yourself in that. You may find out that, oh, I really communicate this way because of something that I learned as a child. And I don't know that I like that about myself, or I want to change that. And so all of a sudden you start changing how you're communicating and you want to do it differently. And so you're letting the partner know all of a sudden, like, hey, I've always done it this way. This is not how I want to do this anymore. And so when I say I need a minute, then I really want a minute because I'm trying to do this differently now.
Mhm.
And you're like, wait a second. Okay. We've done really good. We're really happy with this pattern. We've done it this way for 31 years, but I can see why we want to do this different. Okay. So I kind of go back to listening curiously again to see how we're going to do it
Right.
differently again.
One thing that we have just recently, actually, I think today, actually, we had the conversation about it, but I was throwing out some ideas for you on a situation that we had. And you were kind of tiptoeing around whether or not you liked that idea or not, but you were being very careful because you didn't want me to feel like my idea was rejected. And I took a moment, I stopped the conversation right there and said, okay, look, I realize because I have ADHD, I also have what they call RSD. It's rejection sensitivity disorder. Did I say that right? Or
Dysphoria.
dysphoria? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So anyway, I have a tendency, or most people with ADHD that have that can feel rejected very easily, and they either find a way to mask it or they deal with it or whatever. But you have this strong desire to not for me to not feel hurt in any way, shape, or form. You know, you never want to do that, which is good. That's how you should as a spouse. But I said, I realize that that is something that I have to deal with. But I also have another personality trait that is either good or bad, that I am overly confident in my ideas anyway. I always believe my idea will work. And it doesn't matter if anyone else agrees with that idea, it does not phase me. We can go with someone else's idea, but in the back of my mind, I always know that my idea would have worked. And so I don't really feel rejection. Again, I don't know if that's a good personality trait or a bad one, but it is one that I have. So I actually stopped and said, "Hey, if you don't like that idea, you can tell me you don't like the idea. I won't feel one way or the other about that. I'm just spitballing here. I'm just throwing things against the wall to see what'll stick. It does not phase me one way or the other, whether you like my idea or dislike my idea." And I saw that in your eyes. You were just like, well, that does not make any sense whatsoever because it's so opposite of your
Right.
personality and how you would. Sometimes it's almost like you would rather be personally rejected than to have your idea rejected, right? Because you want to feel like you're contributing in that way. And so just the difference in our personality there made us look at that very differently. And I could see as you were trying to be very sensitive to what you felt like my need was, I had an opening to say, look, that's not my need. You're being sensitive somewhere where you don't have to be sensitive, you
Mhm.
know? And so moments like that, to recognize those and take advantage of those moments and give your partner a clue as to what you need and what you don't need in those moments. Really, what it did was save us several minutes, probably, of tiptoeing around that and exploring it deeper when it really didn't need to be explored deeper. You didn't like that idea or didn't want to do that idea, and that was fine with me. But
And deep down, you think it's the best idea and we should do it.
it still would work. I mean,
Yeah.
like, that's the deal. It doesn't bother me, but I'm okay trying other things
Mhm.
too, or going away. I would rather do, instead of doing something in that instance that I really believe would work, if it's not something that you're into or not something that you're gonna be 100% behind, I would rather find something you're 100% behind that may work as well.
Mhm.
And so I'm okay leaving that
Right.
there. And so in those instances, having those conversations, it saved us from chasing a rabbit we didn't need to chase. And instead, we went to more of a conclusion or an idea, really, that we both were behind. And so we're going to try that instead.
Mhm.
And that's perfectly fine. So the big deal about that was not necessarily the situation as much as recognizing those moments and being honest enough about
Your
your own
own.
personality, your
Mhm.
own needs to be able to express those in that
Mhm.
moment because that doesn't seem like that big of one because it was something I was okay with. But you also need to be able in those moments to talk about the things that hurt you, to be able to because you've went into conversations before and you've said things like, okay, you need to be very careful here. I'm going to tell you this,
Mhm.
but you need to be careful how you react to it because I'm unsure about it anyway. And the least little thing may send me over the edge, or whatever. And you're very open about those things. And we've gotten to a point where you trust me enough to be able to do that.
Right.
And so instead of either avoiding it altogether and just not sharing that idea because you were afraid it was going to be rejected in the wrong way, instead of doing that or sharing it and then me responding wrong because I didn't know you were that sensitive about it, you just preface it,
Mhm.
with, "Hey, you need to tread lightly here." And I'm okay with that. I would rather know. I would
Mhm.
rather know those things so
Right.
that I know how to communicate to that. It doesn't mean that because you're sensitive about it, doesn't mean that I have to agree with it. It just means that I need to be careful about how I disagree with it.
Right. And so it's so important in communication that you are not only open and honest with each other about it, but open and honest with yourself about it. And if you don't know, and we've been, working on this as well, it's saying, I don't know. Like,
Mhm.
I'm going to bring this up and I want to talk about it, but I don't know how I feel about it. Or I don't know where I stand on this, but we need to talk about this.
And giving the person the opportunity or the permission to say, "Okay, we need to stop talking about this.
Hmm.
Like I thought I could do it, I can't.
Hmm.
Let's drop it and go a different way or talk about something else right now." And then letting that happen.
And part of that also is then being in a place where you can trust the other person to start reading you
Mhm.
as well. And
Mhm.
again, we have the advantage of having almost 31 years. I mean, we have been together 31 years, but
Right.
almost 31 years of marriage where you can start reading each other too. And I mean, body language, tone, those kind of things. It looks like you're starting to get upset. You look like you're starting to get emotional. Do we need to
Yeah.
like do we need to stop here or did I step on a toe? Did I,
Right.
like where we cuz we already said we didn't know where we, and that
Mhm.
kind of thing. And so we can then help the other person. And so sometimes it is, oh, you're right. This is too hard. We do need to take a step back. Or no, I really feel like, this is hard, but yes, I need to keep going. And so, really having that open communication when we are struggling with something new, but we have brought it up and we want to talk about it, or no, we are at a stopping point at
Right.
this time.
Well, and the important part about that you stated is that we have been together for
Right.
31 years. And so we have learned what you said there was, you look like you are getting upset. Well, that from 30 years of experience. And so the thing that couples get in trouble with early on in their relationship a lot of times is that they don't know each other as well as they think they know each
Hmm.
other. And so if you were to say that statement, really what you are saying is you look like someone who is
Hmm.
getting upset. Like you look like you're supposed to look when you're getting upset. But it doesn't necessarily mean that because sometimes if I'm concentrating in
Hmm.
a certain way, or if depending on the subject matter, depending on what we're talking about, I can look upset or frustrated or mad just when I'm thinking hard
Right.
because I get serious and
Hmm.
my serious is often confused with
Right.
anger or frustration. I see that at coaching all the time.
Right.
When I'm serious, my tone of voice changes and
Right.
I get very not mean, but I get very direct and I get very pointed. And direct is probably the best word. It's the fewest number of words to get the point across that I need to get across. And so it seems like I'm being very short when in fact I'm just being direct and, dealing with teenage girls or preteen girls coaching volleyball, they misunderstand that sometimes
Mhm.
because in their friend group, if that happens, somebody's mad. For me, it's not like that. And so
Well, I was just going to say, even for us when we first got married,
Right.
when you were direct, I was like,
Right.
"Why are you mad at? Why are
Right.
you being mean to me?" And you're
Why are
like,
you
"I'm."
yelling? I'm not yelling.
You're
I'm
like,
just
"I'm just
being
being direct," and so
yes.
I mean, like that can be misinterpreted by a lot of
Right.
people. I mean, I've even had people come to me before. They're like, "John's so mad," and I'm like, "No, he's just being direct. That's him. I mean, like, don't take offense to that. That's
Right.
him being direct." And so I think that's part of understanding.
It varies with the seriousness
Right.
of the situation. And
Hmm.
you know that. So
Hmm.
you can read me in those situations where other people can't.
Hmm.
And if we come into our relationship just thinking that you have the stereotypical reactions that everybody else has, or, even my last relationship had, or or my parents had, or whoever, it's not necessarily bad that you recognize those that way.
Hmm.
It's just bad to pin those on your partner and assume that that's what they're feeling when you really don't know. And so asking that question, hey, you sound mad to me.
Right.
Not I'm not saying you are mad, but that sounds mad to me, even to the point of I'm not asking you to change how you are talking. If it's something that's super aggressive or something of that nature, there that may need to change. But you've never asked me to not be direct. You've only asked me, "Hey, are you mad or being direct?" And I can tell you, I'm not mad at all. I'm just this is what needs to happen. And so being able to talk with your partner, communicate with your partner, this is the way that you sound to me. That may or may not be what you mean. I just need to know if that's what you mean.
Right. And so, like the example I was talking about is, I can say to you,
Mhm.
you seem like you're getting upset, or this feels like, or you can say to me. So we're not necessarily using those direct I statements or
Right.
those kind of things because we're further along. And I'm not saying because we're better than, it's
Right.
just because of the level of comfort and where we're at in our communication journey and our marriage. But if you're newer in that, it would be recommended very
Mhm.
much that you are using that I statement. I feel like maybe you're getting upset, or that looked like, so that you aren't putting something on them. Again, you're listening with curiosity.
Right.
You're asking a question, an I statement, those kind of things.
Right.
And that was what I was fixing to say. And you jumped in, and that's
Right.
fine
Right.
because you were headed in the same
Yeah.
direction.
Well, we have real world examples of that too,
Right.
because one of the things that bothers me a lot is for people to pin emotions on me,
Right.
to say that I feel one way when I don't feel that way.
Mhm.
We've had that conversation 10,000 times,
Right.
right? You have a tendency to apologize a lot, just part of your personality. And you'll say things like, "I'm sorry you're mad," and I'm like, "I'm not mad. I'm getting mad,
Right.
but I'm not
I'm not
mad.
mad yet,
Quit
but I'm
saying
headed
I'm
there.
mad."
Right.
So allowing your partner to have their own emotions, not pin emotions on them,
Right.
that's the same as assuming that they're
Mhm.
doing something, right? When you're pinning emotions on those, just say something like, "Well, I know you're angry, but," well, unless you really know that, unless they've told you they're angry, you don't know that. It's more of, "Well, I'm assuming you're angry, but,"
Mhm.
right? So you have to be sure that you are really dealing with the emotion that the other person is feeling if you are going to be communicating effectively.
It's really recognizing and having that built up. But you could definitely say, especially if you're talking about something that is new or challenging, and you're saying, I don't know how I'm going to feel. I really want you to be my barometer in this and
Mhm.
help me know. Okay. In going into doing that, how would you like me to point out if I see a change in you or if something's going on? Do you want me to say, I see you, what looks like you're getting upset? You look like you may be feeling some strong emotions, and not label them? Do you want me to label them what I think I'm seeing in you, and have those guidelines set up ahead of time? And that can vary, but definitely go in with curiosity, ask those questions, and prepare for what you're expecting with each other
Mhm.
when you have those beforehand.
Right.
We do it a little differently just because of where we're at. There's still times that we do need to, and I try very hard with you to ask those questions. If you haven't, you tend to jump in and
Mhm.
start, and then I go, wait, I have questions. But if I come to you, I tend to say, okay, here's what's going to happen, and I need you to do X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
It's just our difference in personality. But then we can do that with each other just because we've done this a little longer. And I'm not bragging, and I'm not saying we're perfect, but that's just kind of how we've created
Mhm.
our communication dialogue and our or the way we do it as a couple. And you'll find that that's what you do as you go along and you create this for you. Your communication will be your communication. It'll look the way it looks for you too. So you're not going to create something that, we're going to give you ideas and ways to apply it and ways to do this, but it's not going to be, this way always for everybody. Here's the cookie cutter stamp and you have it. It'll look different for everybody just a little bit. It's going to be your own style, but it gets you there with these ideas.
Well, that's I think, good segue into some real world things that couples can try or couples need to understand in order to effectively communicate with each other to maybe stay away from some of those bigger arguments or alleviate some of that before it happens. Knowing, not everyone is a stereotypical man or stereotypical woman. If the stereotypes were always true, then your relationship would be very easy. When it comes to stereotypes, the crazy thing about them is nobody is really stereotypical, right? Nobody is 100% everything that you would think of in that situation. And so it's very important to have those kind of conversations. What are some things that you see as stereotypical or that you believe are stereotypical response, and how do we respond to those things? I can start to kind of give you an idea, but I actually saw a reel this week that made me think of this, knowing we were going into this conversation, but it was talking about the length of the wife's story. And now I'm a talker. I'll talk, as you have seen in this podcast. I can talk about anything forever. But when telling a story, stereotypically, females have a tendency to tell much longer stories, A, than what males do, and B, than what males can hold their attention to. And so it is fairly normal for us to hear wives say things like, well, he just doesn't listen to me when I'm sharing about this or when I'm sharing about that. He just doesn't listen. He has a tendency to zone out. That's not good. He should not do that. But how are you contributing to that? And how are you helping to alleviate that on your part? In the world today, attention spans are so much shorter than what they used to be. But if you can't get your message across in the amount of time that his attention span will allow, it's not only his fault. Should he listen better? Yes. Should he work on getting to where he can pay attention longer and listen longer and all of those things? Very much he should. But also, you should probably work on trying to narrow that down a little bit. Get it closer to a real length instead of a YouTube length. Get it down closer to something where you're sharing more of the facts in a way that he can grab those facts that he needs to. What do you have that's kind of like that?
Men and women can carry a tone while they're communicating.
Mm-hmm.
And when there is a tone, the other person is not always aware that there is a tone. And once the tone has been picked up, everything else stops to exist.
Mm-hmm.
That tone has been picked up, whether that's I'm angry at you, I'm annoyed with you, I'm whatever. Nothing else matters. It becomes the Charlie Brown experience,
Right.
and it's all wah, 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 and nothing else is heard. And so the other person has then perceived the tone, and that's it. So you're mad at me because of your tone. You sound mad. So I'm now mad at you, or I'm now defending myself. And I've heard nothing other than that. Now I need to be on the defensive, or now you're mad. And so I'm mad, or whatever. And that's the end of it. And so it's really being aware of that tone and what immediately triggers for you when you hear what you feel like is a tone, and then being aware of a tone.
That goes back to what you were saying earlier, because if you come to me with the frustration thing doesn't bother me anymore because we've had that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But if I feel like I'm being mothered, or checked up on, or, where it looks like you're picking apart maybe even what what I've done or what I've accomplished or what I haven't accomplished, that tends to set me in a different mindset. And what happens with the tone, like you're talking about, whether it be a motherly tone or, and which is hard, especially if you are, if you've got a couple of toddlers in the house or a couple of young kids and you're used to all day,
Mhm.
talking to them the way that you talk to them. When you turn around and talk to your husband that way, or vice versa,
And
the husband's been
it's
talking.
kind of just I mean, like, again, if like you said, if you have kids at home, you're just used to it. You're like, pick up your toys, pick up your get your suitcase. I mean, like, whatever. You're just
In that
popping it
mode,
off. You're
right,
just yeah, and it
right,
just happens.
right. And so what happens in those instances, though, my first thought is, well, I'm not a, you're not my mama.
Right.
I'm not a kid.
Right.
And what happens is then we stop listening with curiosity.
Mhm.
And now we basically stop listening altogether and we're
Mhm.
just formulating our argument,
Mhm.
right? Soon as she shuts up, this is what I'm going to say.
Mhm.
That's what starts happening in our head
Mhm.
instead of listening with curiosity of, okay, where is this coming from? I I bet the kids were insane today, so that's why she's got this tone,
Mhm.
and she's doesn't mean to be talking to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Instead, that's just the mode that she's in, and she can't break out of it right now. So how do I help her? I can just go do what she asked, and then later on, after she's out of that mode, we can have a conversation of, hey, this is how you talked to me today. And I did it and it's fine. And I understand why you were there. But this was my first thought. And
Mhm.
I didn't do that. Guys love to get credit for things. And so that's a great time for you to be able to get credit and say, look, it really ticked me off, but I was able to get past that and look at why you were where you were and what was happening. And that's going to go a long ways with your spouse, whether it's the man or the woman that's doing it. When you're able to go to them and say, look, this is what happened. I wanted to give you time to cool off before we had this conversation. And instead of reacting like I normally would have reacted, this is what I did instead. Did that help you? Was that better for you? And give them the opportunity to recognize what you did.
And watch your tone when you say, "Was this better for you?"
Yeah, 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 yeah. So you have to go
Don't
into
say,
it.
"Was that better for you?"
Yeah,
I mean, like, I don't know. Did it help you in some way?
right. You have to go into it with the right attitude. But that's kind of communication across the board. You have to
Mhm.
go into it with the right attitude that what you are trying to do is communicate.
Right.
So you want them to hear you exactly as you mean to be heard.
Right.
And so it's important to think about those things in particular.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think the other thing that kind of is a big one is to really watch your body language within any communication. I
Mhm.
think a lot of times we don't always notice what we're feeling internally, but we definitely show it externally.
Mhm.
And so we really let that kind of hang out in our body language a lot of times. So maybe we did go ahead and we heard her tone or we heard his tone and we did the dishes or took out the trash or, moved our bag and shoes that we dropped at
Mhm.
the front door. But we didn't think about what we did with our body language or even a little bit kind of under our breath, mumbled or, rolled
Mhm.
our eyes or, did cross our arms and look at her for a minute and think, right, I'm gonna pick this up, kind of
Mhm.
thing. And we don't think about that. Sometimes that's really, or those micro expressions that we do that we don't really think about or aren't always aware of that still happen. And so we may have gone ahead and picked up the shoes and the bag that we dropped at the front door, but we didn't think about what we did in all of that. So you may even sit down with her later and say, well, this is how I felt. And I still went ahead and did it. But be aware there may be a moment where she said, and I appreciate that, but did you realize that you huffed and
Mhm.
stomped down the hall and then
Mhm.
slammed the closet door too while you did it?
Mhm.
And you may say, I didn't do that, or I had no clue. I mean, like you may get defensive still
Mhm.
again, but sometimes our body language and our micro expressions still betray us
Right.
and how we felt
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
We didn't get a tone, we didn't pop back, but we still and I will be real honest. I know that a lot of times my body language pops out and I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, I said I was going to go joyously, not say anything about what I felt just then.
Mhm.
And I still let it hang out.
Mhm.
And so be aware of what your body language and your micro expressions and stuff are really doing too.
And on the other side of that, you you have to be sure that you are not letting the other person's body language dictate how
Mhm.
you are responding to the situation
Absolutely.
because it's in the same way that tone can get you caught up into the wrong conversation, body language can too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they may be intentionally doing the body language. It may be subconscious,
Mm-hmm.
both of which can be the bad thing.
Right.
Also, body language is subjective in that it may not mean what you think it means, like we
Mm-hmm.
talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody with ADHD a lot of times have trouble with eye contact all of the time. Just because they're not looking at you does not mean that they're not listening to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? I have worked on eye contact for years, way before I ever knew that I had ADHD, because it was something that was always hard for me. I consistently looked down when I talked to people
Mm-hmm.
because that's how I would think. That's how my thoughts came to me. I would look down and I would talk like this all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That was something I had to work. I communicate for a living. I had to work on that and I had to get past that. There were tools that I had to use and things that I had to do to overcome that. But had you just always assumed that every time that I don't look at you, that I'm not listening to you, we would have been in a world of hurt. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it would have set us back a long time. And that's a little one, but that is one time. I mean, sometimes people sit with their arms crossed because it's comfortable,
Mm-hmm.
not because they're, closed off.
Or they're cold all the time. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's me. I mean, I'm cold all the time. I don't stand. Just because I communicate for a living, I don't cross my arms all the time, especially when I'm in conversation. But when I'm standing around, I have my arms crossed a lot of times. When I was heavier, it used to rest on my belly really, really well. So it gave my arms gave my arms a break. But it just may be that that's comfortable for
mm-hmm.
them. Some people have. What's referred to, I believe, as RBF. A lot of times, their face doesn't look like they're really engaged, but they may be. It's just their facial expressions don't match necessarily what's happening
Right.
internally. So you have to be careful in that body language to not assume, but also not let someone else's body language dictate how you are going to respond to the situation.
Absolutely.
You have another one?
Honestly, I feel like we've covered a lot of it. I
Mhm.
think the other thing is really goes back to not, like you said, assuming or just perceiving a situation a certain way just based on your own beliefs.
Mhm.
You really have to listen. And by listening, I think that means everything: body language, your own perceptions, all of that, that this is what it means because this is what I think it means. It's really about always listening curiously to the person that you're talking to.
Mhm.
And again, that's taking all of that in that we've talked about in general and saying, I'm going to be curious about what you're saying in all areas.
Mhm.
And I want to know where you're coming from, and really taking that kind of step back. And I'm going to even say step down and saying, you're the expert in you and what you're saying and feeling. And I want to hear where you're coming from. And then once you're done, I'm going to ask questions if I have questions from I want to know about you because I love you and you're the important person in my life so that we can communicate better.
That's a really big one too, trusting your partner, especially when it comes to them telling you how they are feeling,
Mm-hmm.
to take them at their word. Because if I tell you that I'm not mad, then it's really, I have to be honest. It's not fair for me to say I'm not mad when I am mad. It's okay to be mad.
Mm-hmm.
And learning to deal with that is a big deal. Don't ask the question that you don't want an answer to, right? When you say, "Are you mad?" If they say yes, it's okay for them to be mad. That doesn't mean that they're right or you're right. They're just having an emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot control which emotions come up in our lives, right? I have no control over whether I'm angry or not. I only have control on how I respond to that anger. The Bible says, be angry, but don't sin. I can be angry, but I can't let my response take me to a place that is wrong. I can't let my response to my anger be to lash out to you and hurt you. That's not an appropriate response. But I can be angry and just deal with that in a healthy way. So in the same way that you don't pin an emotion on somebody else, you also have to be open for their response for you to have been right,
Mm-hmm.
that they are angry.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't hold it against them that they're angry. You can only hold them accountable for how they react to that in a detrimental way to you. So them crossing their arms is not hurting you. It doesn't mean that they're not listening. It can tell you how they're feeling a little bit, but it doesn't mean that the words are not still coming out of your mouth and that they're not going into their ears. So be open and honest both about what you are feeling and open and honest letting your partner feel what they feel. It's okay for you to be sad. I hate it when, like, the probably the biggest thing for me in our relationship, I can't stand for you to be upset. Like, I do not, even whether it's at me or at something else, it drives me insane for you to be upset. It's not how I want you to be. And it takes a lot of work for me to sit and let you be sad because you need to feel that at that moment. That's not my go-to. And many times I catch myself trying to fix whatever that is, even if it's not fixable by me, or to make you laugh, just so at least I can't see that you're sad, those type of things. But I have to be okay in letting you be that way. But then you have to be able to, which you are, to not pin that on me or be upset with me that I'm not sad. Nothing happened to me directly to be sad. I can be sad that you are sad, but I may not be sad for the same reason. And so to be open and honest about those emotions and communicate about them takes you leaps and bounds above what most couples ever get to.
Right. And it gives you a level of vulnerability and intimacy that you haven't had before if you haven't been
Mhm.
able to communicate like that,
Mhm.
and brings you closer as a couple.
Right. Any last tips on communication? One thing maybe that you would say, don't do this when it comes to communication.
Never assume when it comes to communication. Ask always. And then be willing to listen curiously.
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway and key point on that would be don't pin your emotions on me. Don't tell your partner what they're feeling because you may or may not be right, but it's not your place to tell them how they're feeling and then take them at their word when they tell you. And then if they continually burn you on that, then you can bring that up in conversation, right? If you say, well, the last time I asked you if you were mad, you said no, but then you really were,
Mhm.
you admitted that you were
Mhm.
mad. So just be honest with me. It's okay.
Mhm.
So my biggest thing would be that don't pin your assumptions or your assumed emotions or whatever. Don't pin those on your partner. Let them have their own emotions.
Absolutely.
So,
He's John.
and she's Shallon, and this is Sitting in a Tree podcast. You guys have a great week. Bye bye.
Bye.